Hello and welcome to the second panel of today, which is about, again, introducing the new book, The Crisis of the 100 Years Afghanistan. Today, we will introduce exactly what this book covers with the book chapter authors along with me as the editor. So, in this case, I would like to first introduce you the authors. The first one is Muhammed Koçak from SETA Foundation. And the second one is Ms. Amina from CAMEA, Islamabad, Center of Afghanistan, Middle East, and Africa. And Mr. Giorgio Cafiero, he is the CEO and founder of the Gulf Analytics in the USA. And finally, we have Shamsa Khalil from Ankara Social Sciences University, a PhD candidate, and also with Pakistani descent. In this book, there was a wide range of topics we had discussed. Well, what we aimed was first to inform the audience about the fundamentals of Afghanistan, because everybody hears exactly what's going on, though. We need to have an, background information about the societal structure, the politics, economics of Afghanistan. So the first thing that we focused was to introduce the country. And then we started delving exactly the historical course and also some prominent discourses. And later then, as the third leg, well, we discussed what happened and with what deficiencies. But as a method, we selected authors from different countries to present a view of themselves, maybe representing an overall perspective of the country. For instance, here we have Amina from Pakistan, and we were in deep need to draft a book chapter on the Pakistani policy on Afghanistan. Well, Gulf countries has always been a prominent actors in identifying the politics in Afghanistan, since we prefer to request a book chapter from Mr. Giorgio Cafiero, because he's an expert on Gulf politics. And also Shamsa Khalil, which is great, with her great knowledge. Maybe for the first time, I don't know if there exists any other book, chapter, or article like this. She studied together with Professor Yeşiltaş, Daesh Khorasan. And in the meantime, Mr. Koçak contributed us to present exactly Russian Afghanistan policy, because his focus has always been Russia and the Central Asian countries. He has just back from Kazakhstan. So he drafted a book chapter on Russia and Russia's undertakings in Afghanistan. I would like to first thank Professor Ramazan Erdal, the co-editor of me, in drafting this book, coordinating this book. And second, all the book chapter authors, because we have others contributing. First, I would like to emphasize one thing, especially to our friends online. There is also one more book chapter in here from Amin Jaferi. And he drafted a chapter on Iran's foreign policy and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, I could not keep in touch with him for a long time, either through mail or WhatsApp. So that's why he's not here. I mean, he's absent. I don't know what happened to him, by the way, right after the events in Iran. But this is the reality. I have to inform the audience. In the meantime, in this book, the first chapter covers the societal structure and ethnical groups in Afghanistan with broad terms by Abdullah Muhammadi, professor of international politics in Turkey. And as the former commander of Kabul Regional Command during the NATO term, retired General Levent Gözkaya drafted Soviet era and Mujahideen wars in Afghanistan. Hüsna Taşyetim, PhD, she discussed Taliban's control and the first term of Taliban in Afghanistan. And then Professor Erda discussed September 11th attacks of Al-Qaeda and the US intervention in Afghanistan. Tanya Goudsouzian, journalist currently working for TRT World, she discussed NATO's efficacy, NATO's applications in Afghanistan. She is now coordinating TRT World Forum in Istanbul, so that's why she could not participate to this event. We have two professors from Eskişehir Osman Gazi University and discussed econopolitics of Afghanistan, mainly during the NATO term. İsmet Horasanlı from SETA Foundation, he scrutinized the second Taliban term with broad terms. And now we will discuss the rest, other than my chapter, Turkish Foreign Policy and Afghanistan. So I would like to thank all the book chapter authors. And I would like to start first with Muhammed Koçak to present what he scrutinized, what are the findings, and what he abstracted in the conclusion in his book chapter. I know that we have a limited time for 1 hour, so I would request all of you to limit your speech like 10 minutes, please. Thank you so much. Muhammed, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I can manage in 10 minutes. I will do my best. Okay. Thank you very much for hosting the panel. Actually, I think it was a great book. I would recommend everyone to read it. I mean, if you want to learn about the what happened in Afghanistan, especially for the past 20 years. So I tried to contribute to this book with my analysis on Russia's foreign policy in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. However, we should know that, I mean, we should be aware of the fact that, well, I mean, if you want to understand Russia's foreign policy toward Afghanistan today, well, we need to know a little bit about the history behind it. So before the, I mean, in the past 20 years, when we mentioned that, well, we actually talk about the Afghanistan after the US-led NATO intervention towards the country. But before that, it was a very important space in the earth for Russia. Well, for example, in the mid-19th century, Afghanistan was a country which hosted the competition between Russia and the British Empire. You know, what they call the Great Game, because even though, I mean, when the Russian Empire expanded towards the Central Asia, and the British Empire basically just raised its eyebrows because, you know, it was dominating what we call today the India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh area. So Afghanistan was sort of the area where they couldn't really share between them. So it remained as a buffer zone for a long time until the early 20th century. But then in 1919, Afghanistan became independent. So during the Cold War, Afghanistan remained independent still, but the Soviet Union tried to influence it through development aids, through basically supporting the Communist Party in Afghanistan. And fast forward to 1980, we saw the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which basically facilitated probably the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, it should show us that Afghanistan was a very important, strategically important country for the Soviet Union, for the Russian Empire, and now for the Russian Federation. During the 90s, well, Russia didn't have much. Well, Afghanistan didn't have the priority for the Russian foreign policy because they tried to figure out how they basically where they situate in the New World Order after the Cold War. So as they try to navigate what is going on, they didn't really prioritize. I mean, they didn't really do anything substantial there. However, that was the era during the 1990s, was when the Russian Federation laid the foundations for their foreign policy approach. Well, first they tried to bandwagon the US, the hegemon. They tried to be involved with the US-led or Western-led international organizations such as the OSCE. Well, they are still the members of OSCE. They even at one point tried to be a member of EU and entertained the idea of becoming a member to NATO even. However, that didn't occur. Well, some academics and pundits blame the US for that because they didn't give Russia a chance, and some argue that, well, it was Russia's fault all along because Russia wasn't actually that serious on that. However, at the end of the day, Yeltsin and his team's enthusiasm on making Russia a part of the Western liberal world order collapsed, and they took a different path. They challenged NATO, they challenged the United States, they openly basically protested the US attempt to become the hegemon. I mean, what they call the US attempt to become a hegemon or in the world politics. So, however, so it was under these circumstances that Putin came to power as a strong leader of Russia, and the US and the United States decided to intervene into Afghanistan in 2001, which is where our focus began actually. But surprisingly, Putin actually very enthusiastically supported Bush in his attempt to kind of fix things in Afghanistan. He was one of the first world leaders to call Bush and providing his steadfast support. He even, he also supported the, posthumously kind of the US help created Northern Alliance by opening its land borders and, enabling the supply of very important material to the forces that are fighting Taliban in Afghanistan. However, Russia's perception towards the United States little bit changed during the later parts of the 2000s because of the US support towards the color revolutions, US invasion of Iraq. Well, they again began to see US as an assertive and aggressive hegemon that needs to be stopped. So it was at that point that there was a change of perception in Russia. However, and then Obama was elected in the United States. Obama basically adopted a little bit of more minimalistic approach. He didn't want to just dominate Afghanistan. He actually wanted to take its force out from Afghanistan. So, and also, it was also at that point that there was a reset in the relations between Russia and the United States. So at this point, Russia actually saw an opening in Afghanistan where they could be, the Russians could be a little bit more influential. It was also at that point that Russia annexed Crimea, became involved in Syria, becoming even more assertive, while the United States is pivoting towards Asia, reducing its forces in the Middle East and in Afghanistan. And we have Russia over there seeing an opportunity. So at this juncture, in Afghanistan, Taliban was amassing power, becoming more and more powerful. And Russia started its secret talks with Taliban. According to the information circulated online, and it wasn't really verified, but the first secret talk between Russia and Taliban happened in December 2015, and we have another one in 2017, and there was also some level of cooperation between Russia-led cooperation between the regional countries such as Iran, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, obviously. But also, well, the United States also at that point, starting from 2017, 2018, becoming more active. Trump actually wanted to end the Afghan agenda for the United States by making a deal with the Taliban, basically sending its envoy Zalmay Khalilzad. So, well, obviously Russia, which was also conducting its own initiatives, was a little bit disturbed by that. So at that point, Russia, to up its effort, also started an intra-Afghan dialogue, and hosted the representatives of different factions fighting each other, basically in Afghanistan, in Moscow. At that point, also, well, as the talks between the United States and Afghanistan progressed, there was also another channel that was opened between the United States, Russia, and China, discussing each other, basically deciding the future of Afghanistan. However, again, flash forward to 2020, and the United States further reducing its forces in Afghanistan, and we see the eventual Taliban takeover there. So when we see the Taliban takeover, basically the whole situation changed. The United States almost completely lost its remaining influence, actually, the remaining influence in Afghanistan, I mean, on the ground, because it's the government the United States supported basically fall, and at that point Russia's initiatives became even more important. So after the Taliban victory, the Russian Federation basically left with three important goals in Afghanistan. The first one is the regional security, and actually the security of Russia. Well, after the collapse of the Afghan Republic, well, the forces in Afghanistan, the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, was actually doing a work that also favors Russia, because they were providing security for, like, regional security for all the countries in the region. When they left, Russia had to supplement its forces in neighboring countries such as Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and in Russia's border regions. So it actually costed Russia, if we talk about the security vacuum created the collapse of the Afghan government. Well, the second aim of the Russian Federation, especially with the relations between the United States and Russia further deteriorated, is Russia's increased efforts for taking the initiative in basically stabilizing the region and creating an Afghanistan for an Afghanistan that is not hostile to Russia, or that fits Russia's agenda better. So for that, Russia basically started, or actually, I mean, it already started. So it gave impetus to what it called the Moscow format. So they had certain meetings. I think the last one happened just 1 month. No, 1 month ago. So they basically hosted, again, regional countries and tried to they tried to find solutions for the pressing problems of Afghanistan. You can liken this format to the Astana format, where there was a process of reconciliation in Syria led by Russia, Turkey, and Iran. So in this last Moscow format talks, and the Taliban wasn't invited, but the Taliban were informed posthumously. They called for the United States to unfreeze the assets of Afghanistan, and called for a more inclusive government in Afghanistan. And the latest aim for the Russian Federation is a little bit less important: regional trade, regional security, these kinds of stuff. For example, Russia just secure the deal with Afghanistan for sales of grain and sales for natural gas and other sorts of energy. So in the near future and in the midterm, we should see Russia becoming more involved in Afghanistan, especially when we see the trend of Russia's contacts with the US-led world order further weakening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, Russia is a player, still a player, even though Russia is engaging to Ukraine war. Well, Putin is claiming Russian imperialism, which does cover the other regions, mainly Central Asia. You cannot exclude, for instance, Kazakhstan or the other Turkey countries, Tajikistan. That means Afghanistan will be at the hub of Russian thinking. Even though there is another fact, the Afghan community does have a unity in terms of their thoughts. It's the Russian invasion and their heroic resistance to Russians. Maybe it's one of the rare and important, prominent thing that they unite themselves just across a certain heritage of history. Well, now let's go to the neighbor of Afghanistan. Amina is here, and she is leading one of the most important think tank research center in Pakistan. And Pakistan does have a perception, a picture of Afghanistan, that's for sure, and also vice versa. So let's hear exactly, with an updated version actually, what is the, Pakistani perception of Afghanistan. The floor is yours, dear Amina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aslan, and of course to the SETA Foundation. I think it's so important to have, a collective approach on Afghanistan, and getting these different perspectives is essential. And I thank you. You've also contributed the, Turkish perspective to a book that we've also published, which is similar to yours. I'm not going to take too long because I do encourage readers to read the book, but I will give a little snippets into, the Pakistani perspective. And I'm going to have trouble here because I'll be very honest with you. Initially, Pakistan's approach towards Afghanistan has been contradictory and vague throughout its history. But I take pride in saying that now I think Pakistan does have a policy towards Afghanistan, and particularly after 2021, we see that it's been driven by a regional approach, but I will come to that later. Let me just talk about the relationship in itself. Now, if one looks at the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, despite very few brief moments of stability, unfortunately, the relationship has followed a very negative trajectory. It has been embedded in a vicious blame game. There's been mistrust. And I think this has primarily been because, unfortunately, the historical irritants between both countries have not been addressed. And that is why when the Taliban did come into power, there were certain elements within the country that might have been rejoicing this new, regime. But I think it was naive of them to think that the relationship would, all of a sudden improve, because just a mere change of regime does not address those historical irritants that have existed between both the countries. And unfortunately, there has been no sincere effort on the part of both countries. And I'm talking about successive governments in Afghanistan post 2001, and of course in Pakistan, to address those irritants. So I think this has been a major, major issue between both the countries. And these primarily revolve around the border. Yes, the border is not an issue for Pakistan in terms of its legality. However, there are, concerns in Afghanistan, and this is not just limited to a particular regime. They do not accept the legality of the border, and time and again we have had issues. Apart from a brief moment, again, of stability, and this is particularly when we had the tripartite policy where you had the Afghans, the Pakistanis, and NATO, you saw relatively stability on the border. Unfortunately, after that, there has always been issues, and more so after the current dispensation came into power. So the border is an issue. They need to focus on it, and they need to move towards joint border management. This is essential. We did have something similar to this in the Afghanistan-Pakistan Action Plan for Peace and Solidarity. But again, politics has always, unfortunately, sabotaged any moves towards this. Now, another issue here is that, unfortunately, the relationship has always been viewed through the limited prism of security. And we saw this even in the peace process, and time and again, you would have successive Afghan leaders at one point saying that Pakistan is essential for the peace process, that it is a conjoined twin. And when we saw something not really working on the peace process, then Pakistan, of course, was the abettor of terrorism and supporter of the Taliban. So again, a major issue has been that the relationship has been viewed through a very limited prism, and therefore the contours of any bilateral relationship, which are always diverse, have not been seen in this relationship. For example, if you look at trade, if you look at, again, the border, if you look at people to people contact, even important issues such as a water sharing agreement does not exist between these two countries. Now, I find this ironic because we talk about the interdependent relationship. And here, let me flag time and again, you might hear people within Pakistan referring to the relationship as a dependence relationship, particularly in terms of Afghanistan. I don't think so. I think it's an interdependent relationship where both countries need each other, not just simply because of the cultural and the religious linkages, but primarily because of geography. And it is ironic that Afghanistan has a strategic partnership agreement with India. This was signed in 2011. It has a strategic partnership agreement with Iran. But surprisingly, with Pakistan, there is nothing of the sort. There is no structural framework between the two countries. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons that the relationship has not been able to evolve. And therefore, I feel that while, yes, Pakistan is definitely following a regional policy, it has to at least, start exploring having some sort of a framework with Afghanistan. It doesn't have to be a strategic partnership agreement. These are fancy terms, but it has to have some sort of a bilateral framework. This is, I think, essential for both countries. Now, currently, under the current regime, as I said, the relationship has been strained, and this is not surprising. Unfortunately, we have seen a spike in terrorist activities regarding the TTP, which is a major concern for Pakistan. Again, here, I think it's important to again flag that Pakistan's policy is very different from the past. I will repeat and reiterate that we are following a regional policy where Pakistan's expectations from the Taliban are exactly the same expectations that the international community expects the Taliban to deliver on. And I think it's important for the Taliban to adhere to the agreements and the pledges that it agreed to in the Doha Agreement, as it is for the Americans as well. It is also important, I think, for the Taliban to particularly deliver on counterterrorism assurances. I'm sure you're all aware that our ambassador was attacked a few days ago. Before that, we have had a number of killings across the border, and this has created further irritants in our relationship. And I don't think this is limited just to Pakistan. Regional countries, there is a sense of frustration that the Taliban are not able to deliver on these fronts. And if they don't adhere to these pledges of reform, I think it's going to create even more stumbling blocks. And it's going to be very difficult for countries like Pakistan that have traditionally had a close relationship with the Taliban to justify this relationship and to increase engagement. Therefore, the Taliban certainly has to deliver on this front. More so, I will just add here that I think it's very important to view Afghanistan as a collective and a shared responsibility. Unfortunately, as the previous speaker also pointed out to the Ukraine crisis, we in the region also feel, this is Pakistan as well, that no conflict should be given precedence over the other. And we do feel that with Ukraine, the Ukrainian crisis, Afghanistan is being pushed on the back burner, and it is being viewed as a regional problem. As per se. And I think that is, again, very naive and unfair to do so, because Afghanistan is an area that has always had global ramifications. And it's just a matter of time before you see elements like the ISKP creeping into other parts of the world. For Pakistan, the question of transnational terrorist groups is extremely worrisome because, as I said, Afghanistan is right next to us. Iran and Pakistan, I think by far, are the two major countries that are always affected by events in Afghanistan. This might sound like a cliche, but this is the honest truth. And one just merely has to go to the border at Turkham and Chaman to see the kind of impact. While Europe has begun to close its borders to refugees, even if Pakistan wants to do so, it simply cannot. And we have been seeing an increase in illegal refugees coming into Pakistan. So therefore, there has to be a consolidated approach towards not only the Taliban, but dealing with these transnational terrorist groups. I will just end here quickly by saying that we see regional countries engaging with the Taliban bilaterally, but we still are lacking a coherent regional framework. And I think that is essential. We still do not have a credible regional interlocutor that I think could lead that particular framework. There have been talks of reviving the 6+1 or something similar to the Quad, whatever it may be. I think it's very important to have a regional framework. We do have regional consensus, but it hasn't really been translated into a framework, and I think it's essential. There is obviously reluctance on all sides. We do see the Moscow format, we saw the Tashkent format or the Tashkent conference, but it has to go beyond that. And it has to be more on, focusing on not only the humanitarian crisis, but I think also reviving the Afghan economy, because that is completely different to, the humanitarian issue, and working towards some sort of a counterterrorism framework. This is essential because, the Taliban, let's be very honest, they've delivered on security somewhat, but there is the question of human security. And at the end of the day, the Taliban are trying to consolidate their position within the government and within the group, because there are major differences and divisions. Therefore, I think it's a little unfair to completely leave it to the Taliban. Also, regional countries need to take ownership. And I think it's essential to focus on some sort of a framework. So I'll end here, and I would encourage everybody to read the chapter. That's important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Amina. From the Turkish perspective, Afghanistan, Pakistan has always been way with equal distances, and let me just transfer a piece of knowledge that's always repeated on the books about either Afghanistan or Pakistan in Turkey. They start the history of relations with both countries starting from 1920s. Once you start discussing a modern issue, they first visit 1920s. On the other hand, for the Pakistani side, maybe a bit integrated to Bangladesh to this argument, it has been the first issue circulated is the support of Pakistanis and Bangladeshi Muslims to Turkish independence war with the golds that they had gathered in the mosques and sent it to Ankara government. And for Afghanistan, well, the same applies. So the wishful thinking in here is the good relations of both, stability in the region, and maybe focusing on multi-layered interaction of both countries for the benefit of the publics, I believe. So thank you so much, Amina. Now let's go and visit Gulf countries, Giorgio. Your book chapter was really fascinating. I read it maybe 3 or 4 times, I don't remember. And it portrayed exactly the picture because the competition in the Gulf region does have reflections in remote areas, and Afghanistan is one place as such. You can see the same picture in Libya, for instance, nowadays. So let's try to understand the perceptions of the Gulf countries regarding Afghanistan. Maybe we can abstract a generalization just to build up a base for a further comparison to other conflicts. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was really an honor to contribute this chapter to the book, and it's so wonderful to be with all of you today. I thank SETA Foundation for this chance to share some thoughts about the issues and some of the developments that have taken place very recently in GCC Afghanistan relations. So obviously, no member state of the Gulf Cooperation Council shares a border with Afghanistan, but it is no secret that the GCC states have very high stakes in post-US Afghanistan. There is real potential for instability, in violent extremism in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan to have direct and indirect impacts on the monarchies on the Arabian Peninsula. As we look at the three GCC states, which I focused on in the chapter, which of course are Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, I think we can understand these countries, especially Qatar and the UAE, as sort of being post-occupation Afghanistan's gateway to the West and by extension, the rest of the world. We obviously know that no country in the world, and certainly no country in the GCC, has formally recognized the Taliban, but what we are seeing is sort of a gradual and informal and a partial recognition of the Taliban on the part of numerous countries around the world. And I think the engagement that's taking place between some of the GCC states and Taliban, and really here I'm mainly focusing on Qatar and UAE, quite frankly, these links and this kind of engagement between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi on one side and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan on the other are important in so many ways, important to the Gulf states, important to Afghanistan, and also, quite frankly, very important to Western interests. As we all know, after the US/NATO occupation came to an end in August 2021, it was an absolutely chaotic and disturbing situation in Afghanistan. And the Qataris and the Emiratis played a huge role in terms of helping Western diplomats, Western journalists get out of Afghanistan in a safe manner. And also they played an important humanitarian role as sort of a transit hub for, I believe, roughly 120,000 Afghans. They went through Qatar and UAE, either to stay in those countries, at least staying there for now, or at least while they were en route to other countries elsewhere, such as in Europe or North America. So it goes without saying that the Qataris and the Emiratis were there for the West to sort of help out with an extremely difficult situation that, from an American perspective, was rather humiliating and was very painful for many people in the United States to see. Right now, though, there's a question about what's the path moving forward. How will these countries deal with the reality of Taliban rule? We do know there's obviously this history. 2 out of 3 of the countries that did recognize the Taliban during its time in power back in the late 90s and the early 2000s were in the GCC. It was Saudi Arabia and UAE. And this is one historical factor that's prompted some people to think that perhaps the first government in the world that would formally recognize the Islamic Emirate now might be one of those countries. I certainly think that that is possible, but something I do believe, and I tried to articulate in the chapter, is that I think GCC states would move slowly when it comes to an all-out formal recognition. I think maybe an informal recognition or a slow and a gradual partial recognition is what's going to happen before we would see an official Taliban-controlled embassy opening up in one of those countries and being 100% legitimized. I think there would probably have to be some changes on the part of the Taliban's conduct when it comes to women's rights or when it comes to demonstrating some greater moderation or some greater commitment to combating global terrorist organizations. I think GCC states right now believe that the prospects of them formally recognizing the Taliban could be a means to sort of entice the rulers in Kabul towards some greater moderation. So it's a card they have that can be valuable, but it's not to be played too soon. I think in general, GCC countries are not very pleased with what they're seeing from the Taliban. There is much disappointment, quite a bit of concern. Obviously, you know, Doha was sort of a diplomatic center for Western diplomats and representatives of the Taliban to meet for a long time. However, what is quite evident is that the Taliban representatives who were in Doha for many years were a little different from many of the Taliban figures on the ground in Afghanistan. And I think those who have been present in Afghanistan have been a little more hardline than the Taliban representatives who spent years having meetings in Doha. So in recent months, over the last year or so, I think the Qataris have been sort of taking stock of the reality that the Taliban is rather difficult to moderate. And even though Qatar has its diplomatic engagement with the Taliban, and Qatar has sort of been somewhat of a gateway between Afghanistan and the West, that's not to say that the Qataris have had an easy time influencing the Taliban. I think the Emiratis are trying to pursue that themselves. We recently saw, just earlier this month, a few days ago actually, the president of the UAE, Muhammed bin Zayed, met with the Taliban's acting defense minister. I think that's a very, very significant meeting, and it speaks volumes about the UAE's strategies for dealing with the reality of Taliban rule in post-US Afghanistan. I don't think the UAE was happy to see a regime like the Taliban come back to power last year, but the UAE always maintains a very flexible foreign policy. Very, to their credit, the Emiratis have always been very good at adapting to new circumstances, shifting course very quickly to make the most out of whatever situation is in front of them. And I think in the Gulf countries, there's probably a recognition that the Taliban may not fall from power anytime soon. And whatever the international community or the GCC states think of Taliban, it's most pragmatic to try to engage them in some way and see if there's something that the Gulf Arab states could do to try to moderate Taliban's behavior. This would obviously bode well for longer term stability in Afghanistan. And if there's longer term stability in Afghanistan, that's obviously positive for GCC states, which are always worried about how the humanitarian disasters in Afghanistan can be drivers for extremism, can cause more refugee movements, can create fertile ground for extremist groups, which has obviously happened in history and can certainly, we can see much more of that in the future. So there's obviously this point about how GCC states are trying to promote some greater stability. They don't want a situation necessarily where the Taliban might lose influence to ISIS-K. That's obviously a group that GCC states are very worried about, and that's definitely a factor that helps explain why some of the GCC states have chosen to engage the Taliban since August 2021. At the same time, we shouldn't overlook the fact that the GCC is certainly not monolithic. There are different countries in the council that approach regional and international issues quite differently, and there are real elements of competition between the countries. We definitely saw in the 2017 to 2021 GCC crisis that there has been a history of problems between Qatar and some of its fellow monarchies on the Arabian Peninsula. Now, after the blockade has been lifted, following the Al-Ula agreements signing in January 2021, the relations within the GCC have warmed up quite a bit. Seeing Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Salman in Qatar for the World Cup really underscored how tensions in the GCC have eased, but there still is competition. And I think as the UAE is trying to influence the situation in Afghanistan, pursue its own interests, as underscored by the agreement reached in September for an Emirati company to operate and manage the airports in Afghanistan. The Emiratis are being somewhat ambitious in Afghanistan, and I think that factors into some competition between Abu Dhabi and Doha, competition to be the GCC state with the most amount of influence in modern day Afghanistan, in competition when it comes to convincing Washington that either UAE or Qatar is best suited to be a gateway between Kabul and the West. But I'll end with another point that I think is also important. For all the competition between Qatar and UAE, there are shared interests that these two Gulf Arab states have with respect to the Taliban and the situation in Afghanistan at this point. As I mentioned, there is always potential for instability and extremism in Afghanistan to spill into the Gulf region. That is a scenario that no country in the GCC wants. Also, all of the GCC states are frankly terrified by ISIS-K, as well as Iran, meaning Iran is also scared of ISIS-K for very good reason. Mm-hmm. So all of the countries in the Persian Gulf do not want to see that extremist group gain more influence. And so as much as we have competition among Gulf states for influence in post-US Afghanistan, there are many common interests that they have. And hopefully the GCC states will be successful in terms of driving more stability and being drivers for stability in Afghanistan, and helping prevent an exacerbation of humanitarian disasters in the weeks, months, and the years ahead.
Thank you so much, dear Giorgio. You know, when somebody's talk about Gulf countries, it's usually ambiguity, fragility, and sudden shifts in policy. So this is what I observe. I don't know if you agree or not. And I think Afghanistan has been one of the key issues at past, mainly having these countries competing to each other, and thus have a reflection on Afghanistan. So let's see, you know, as you have correctly mentioned. Now, I would like to pass dear Shamsa Khalil. She scrutinized Daesh Khorasan. Now, it's a new force challenging Taliban. Taliban was underground, directly starting attacks to NATO forces, the US forces, or foreign presence over there. On the other hand, today, Taliban, well, they are patrolling across the streets, and now they are open to any sort of challenge. Maybe it's because of Daesh Khorasan's undertakings or else, I don't know. So Shamsa's scrutiny is one of the best on Daesh Khorasan. And there are only a few studies, you know, delineating this topic. So I would like to first thank you. And second thing, I see that there's a great number of fans of you because they are sending, you know, likes in the net. So I think it's a good thing for you. So the word is yours, please.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thanks to my professor and my thesis supervisor, Professor Dr. Murat for trusting me and joining me in this chapter also, and then SETA Foundation, and specifically to you for bringing me to this panel. And today I'll be talking about Islamic State, Khorasan, trajectory, its impact, and broad range effects. Basically, Afghanistan has become a central geopolitical story in the world politics after US withdrew its troops in 2021. The regional global power rivalries, proxy civil war, ethno-sectarian conflict, they reveal a very precarious security landscape. Geopolitical prospect like Afghanistan, where government cloud, they remain convicted to the fragility in the prevailing dynamics. It always creates a vacuum of authority. So such voids are vehemently exploited by the violent non-state armed actor like Taliban and Islamic State Khorasan. There are so many looming factors, but out of them, I focus on two thematic areas. The first one is to trace the emergence and evolution of Islamic State Khorasan by focusing on their ideology, strategy, tactics, territorial orientation, organizational structure, propaganda network, its digital ecosystem and funding. Whereas in the second thematic area, I have focused on wide-ranging impacts on domestic, regional, and global stratum. And in the end, I have analyzed the future of Islamic State Khorasan in the context of the changing dynamics of regional and international power struggle. But due to the shortage of time, I will not be discussing the first part of the chapter, and I'll directly jump in towards the broad range impacts that it has created. So overall, when we see the domestic scale, we see the new era of strategic and tactical tug of war has finally begun between Taliban and Islamic State of Khorasan, because Taliban currently facing multiple challenges. First is to provide security to Afghanistan and international delegation. The second is to gain the legitimacy and recognition from not only from regional, but also from the global power as a state actor. And the third is to conduct a successful counterinsurgency approach against Islamic State Khorasan, and the fourth one is the looming humanitarian crisis. In such a kind of situation, Islamic State Khorasan has openly rejected Taliban victory and bashed that it has it is because of United States of America, and after that, Islamic State Khorasan has incredibly started an active online propaganda against Taliban by categorizing them as the correct one in early 1990s and onward as heretics for blending Islam with the tribal code, signing peace deal with the United States of America, and accusing them of abandoning jihad for the sake of peace. Instead, even if they also say that to establish a very strict jurisprudence of Islam, one does not have to go through the hotel of Qatar and embassies of Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iran. And now if you see a kind of change in their strategic orientation and in strategic policy also, they have brought the Uyghur Muslim issue and to target the pro-Chinese policy of Taliban. If we see, then they are preaching the extremely hardcore jihadist ideology with the aim of tarnishing Taliban image in the jihadist industry and claiming their legitimacy to be the only authentic jihadi force to attract the top recruits into their rank, who are either dejected with Taliban because of their moderate approach or due to their engagement with US or many other international actors. Currently, if we see, Islamic State Khorasan is actually applying the same reverse psychology approach that Taliban was using against Ashraf Ghani's government to discredit them, as they were using the logic that it's backed by US, neither it's the representative of Afghanistan nor of Islam. So ISK is using the same reverse psychology approach with Taliban. And now if we see, although Islamic State Khorasan, after its resurgence in 2021 and now, but it's still short in number, but it has tactical advantage over Taliban in entering into the exclusive area of Taliban's kinetic operation, because they have temporarily left those places to cover up the areas in Kabul for administrative, governance, and security purposes. Tactically, if we see, then Islamic State Khorasan is building upon the urban networking areas. For example, they are building up the Kabul network, which actually function as absorption point for the splinter groups, defectors from Taliban ranks, Haqqani networks, and as well as from Ikhwani militia and many other militia for the urban warfare. But the point to notice here is that the nature of clash has been changed now between both the jihadist actor, because Taliban has transitioned towards a state actor. Now the position has changed. But the Islamic State's primary goal is still to challenge the credibility of Taliban. Before it was as a non-state actor, but now as a state actor who has failed to actually provide the basic security to its people. Islamic State is contributing, further deteriorating the law and order situation. And in this kind of current strategic rivalry in the saturated military landscape of Afghanistan, Islamic State Khorasan is just trying to improve its recruitment tool. For me, the more alarming situation was the prisoners from the Bagram base and Pule Chakri jail, like their probability and their credibility and plausibility to join Islamic State Khorasan in its rank. And with the increased local knowledge and expertise, it further going to increase the resilience and resurgence of Islamic State Khorasan. Now I'll be talking about the regional geopolitical calculus. As we all know that Afghanistan is a gateway to our Central Asian state, but the current crisis endangering the looming cross-border terrorism to Central Asian states and intensified foreign fighter recruitment has posed an indirect threat to Russia, who was patiently waiting for the right time to pull the strings of those Central Asian states who have maintained a considerable amount of distance from Russia in the near past. If we see the Islamic Jihad Renaissance Party of Tajikistan, Islamic Jihad Union, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, and East Turkmenistan Islamic Movement, these all share a very good bond and close bond with Islamic State Khorasan, and they provide the recruitment basis from Central Asia to initiate jihad into Central Asia after Afghanistan. So following all this condition, what Russia is doing, that Russia's engagement with Taliban since 2015 focus on curtailing Islamic State Khorasan, includes increasing influence in Central Russia, but in Central Afghanistan, but also in the eastern and northern one. Overall, if now not after coming from Russia, Islamic State Khorasan is also trying to incite an Iranian Bloch insurgency in Iran by, you can say, cooperating with Harkat-e-Islam Sistan, because Harkat-e-Islam Sistan is also providing recruits to Islamic State Khorasan. And it didn't stop just there. It also tried to merge Iranian Jindullah also with the Pakistani Jindullah in Karachi, because they both have the dual warrior loyalty and they have the exceptionally anti-Shiite strategic orientation. So Islamic State Khorasan's anti-Shiite strategic orientation can provide a wide chance for Iran also to vote for its sectarian-based geostrategic approach and ask for the Gulf countries' assistance to counter the anti-Shiite practices in Afghanistan. The case of Pakistan has already been discussed by my fellow panel. She has already talked about Pakistan, but overall, yes, Pakistan also fears the Islamic State Khorasan cross-border activity. And for that, they are also raising their concern. But the point to see here is that not only Pakistan, but China, Russia, and Iran, all these countries, all these three regional countries has actually agreed, and they have concurrence on the cross-border terrorism and movement of Islamic State in Khorasan into their territories. Now comes the time for India, for example, seeing the fall of the pro-Indian Afghan government, the Taliban coming to power, and Islamic State Khorasan threatening to operate for the liberation of Kashmir under the Vilayat-e-Hind is actually engraving India's anxiety to whether trust one enemy to beat the other one or let the regional dynamics play their part until it necessitates it become very necessary for it to directly engage into this overall situation. But for me, as I think that no insurgency can survive without the support of regional actor. So one possible reverse scenario can also be that India providing any covert support to Islamic State Khorasan to counter Taliban, Pakistan, and China just in a one go. It's just a question, but maybe for the future. Overall, if you see China's concern when, as far as United States of America was there in Afghanistan, China China's security was very well, I would say, very well protected at that moment. But now with US withdrawal and Taliban takeover and unfolding security vacuum, China's concern not only about security, but also its economic investment is growing, is increasing more and more, and also because of the recruitment from the East Turkestan Islamic movement. China is having a huge concern over there. But instead of full-scale engagement, China has opted for a very pragmatic approach with Taliban so that they can protect its Western front from anti-Chinese militant threat. But for me, what is the main problem of this overall region is a lack of a hegemon who is capable of doing anything to protect the region from Islamic State Khorasan, increasing expansion and infringement, like what we see in case of United States of America's over-the-horizon strategy in Middle East, like to target whenever it deems necessary for the more considerable interest of the region and its European partner. But Russia and China, currently, they do not exercise any such kind of capability, which in result compel them to look for concurrence with other major regional and as well as the global stakeholder. In the global stratum, if I see Islamic State Khorasan, it operates locally, but it gives a huge threat to the United States and international community presence, as we see after the US withdrawal, what happened in Afghanistan. Now Islamic State Khorasan is operating after US withdrawal overtly, viciously, and it, according to US intelligence, it aims to target Western countries and European countries as well to get a good influence and to get a good global outreach in the world. At a global stage. In terms of at the last stage of my chapter, I have given different scenarios for cooperation to cater the resurgence of Islamic State of Khorasan at the level where they are now. There are 4 possible scenarios for the cooperation between Taliban and United States of America. The very first scenario is the narrow alignment of interest between US and Taliban, as both want to curb the current resurgence of Islamic State of Khorasan before it become another joint, as it was according to the Global Terrorism Index of 2018 among the 4th deadliest terrorist organization. And the second scenario can be a very tacit kind of cooperation at the military level, but without involving any kind of political coordination, such as intercepting radio communication of Taliban where they need help, how they need help, and tracking them. But it will be the violation of the sovereignty of Taliban. So the third case scenario can be a joint targeting strategy with Taliban to cater Islamic State Khorasan, but like intelligence sharing. But this is a very risky one because of the trust deficit from United States of America, and it will further deepen the divide for hardcore follower of Taliban also. And the fourth one can also be a viable situation for United States after spending 20 years and paying a huge considerable amount of cost in Afghanistan, is to let the local dynamic play the role and do nothing on their own until it becomes a havoc for them. But such a kind of situation is going to generate and worsen the intra-jihadist competition between Islamic State Khorasan and Taliban. But in the worst case scenario, I see Taliban may look towards Al-Qaeda to decrease the influence of Islamic State of Khorasan. But it's also very risky because on one hand, they want to decrease the influence of Islamic State Khorasan, but with the help of increasing influence and capacity and relevance of Al-Qaeda, that's going to be very deadly, we see. Beyond this fourth scenario that I have mentioned, we see that overall, the United States is following the over-the-horizon policy, which is, I don't think so, very much successful in Afghanistan because it's having very few accurate target, but more civilian damage, more collateral damage. And the second actor at the global stratum, if we see, is a European Union, which is in extreme discomfort in the current prevailing situation in Afghanistan because of the limited consultation of United States of America before its withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the second one is its disengagement in terms of reducing the footprint in region, which are very crucial to European Union security. As Trump, not only Trump, but also Biden administration, they have talked about burden sharing and balanced approach for European Union and security operators. So it has invoked huge challenges in the European Union strategic compass, because they need to revisit their concept of strategic autonomy and security as well. So for me, from where I'm looking at this perspective, I see Islamic State Khorasan pose colossal threat to carry out attacks in Europe, which can worsen the ongoing humanitarian crisis and jihadist competition. So overall, in 2021, European Union has given a counter-terrorism plan with the 4 objectives to counter the Islamic State of Khorasan. The first one was the prevention of jihadists from infiltrating into Europe by improving more and more checkpoints and security checks. The second was trying to stop Afghanistan from becoming another safe haven for terrorist organization. The third was monitoring counter-propaganda and mobilization of jihadi ecosystem, the digital one, which is very strong of Islamic State Khorasan is having an excellent digital ecosystem, I would say. And the fourth one is tackling organized crime as a source of terrorist financing. But for me, from where I see is that European Union is trying to establish a very regional political platform where they want to take a regional course of action. They want to strengthen the security situation through dialogue, through exchange of strategic information, to joint counterterrorism effort, but only with the regional countries. They are not interested in developing any kind of cooperation with Taliban regime, and they do not recognize Taliban as a state actor. So for me, like avoiding any kind of cooperation with Taliban, but engaging with the neighboring regional countries is the European Union plan to handle the re-emergence of Islamic State Khorasan terrorism threat. But I see it's quite difficult, and it has its own pros and cons. But for now, if somebody asks from me how I see the future with Islamic State Khorasan, rising threats in Afghanistan, God forbid, it's really complex and controversial, and it's not free from violence and loss of human lives. So this is it from my side. In case of any question and query, I'm there to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamsa. Very brief, very comprehensive. And now you are our expert regarding Khorasan. By the way, the word Khorasan is very sacred in Turkish thinking.
Yeah.
Turkish culture. So when
in Arabic also,
Khorasan, it's a bad thing, because just combining Khorasan, a very sacred place for the civilization of Turks, will be united with a radical organization. It's something challenge to thinking of Turks, by the way. On the other hand, there's another fact. Usually, the Western scholars are tending to defer radicalization with extremism, which I see it a danger, because extremism appears as something more softened in comparison to radicalization. But I don't think that. So radicalization is radicalization. That means doesn't matter if it's religious, if it's ideological, racist, doesn't matter. It's radicalization. This is what I believe. And I would like to touch a bit to Turkish foreign policy. And we have a new guest, your cat, Amina. I like it, by the way.
I am so sorry for this. My apologies.
No. This is really great, I like it. First of all, Turkey perceives Afghanistan, Pakistan as a place of geography, as a geography of heart, of, how do you say? We call it in Turkish, gönül coğrafyası. That means you embrace there with your heart, and heartily welcoming of all features of the region. Well, when you go through the culture of Afghans, it's Nasreddin Hoca, for instance, shared as a cultural figure, or Mevlana, or today they watch the Turkish movies of 1970s and 80s of Kemal Sunal. This is really important. That means we have the same origins, we have the same modes of engaging something. That's really important. And that's why Turkey's or Turkish foreign policy is not away from the region. But as I drafted in my chapter, Turkey preferred a gradual engagement to Taliban government right after 2021. Why? Because they wanted to first see the practices on the ground. On the other hand, Turkish diplomats, Turkish policy makers isolated two different avenues. The first one is what? The humanitarian engagement. It's not indexed or correlated to Taliban's presence. And the second one, well, it's something else. It's Taliban's engagement and practice. If Taliban complies with the demands of international community, Turkey will stand by it. But if not, that means Turkey will be a bit away. So this is the general mood of Turkish foreign policy, I believe. But Turkey is also concerned about the geostrategic occurrences, I believe. The first thing is a concern regarding social structure and identity of the Afghan community. I know it's fractured. I know it's something more than expected because the number of languages spoken in Afghanistan is more than known, not only 30 or 32, maybe more. The number of ethnicities and sub-identities, subcultures, well, they are really more. On the other hand, if this trend continues, I believe that the Afghan identity, which is really weak, well, it will disappear. And it's a danger for Afghans. Second thing, Taliban just delineated one thing for the other radical organizations. It's, the ability of toppling down a regime and also repelling foreign military presence in Afghanistan. So it does become a sample case for the ones, especially in Africa, which are rather weak governments. So I think not only Turkey, but the global community, international community, not only community of states, but also the publics must be concerned about it. And third thing about geostrategy Turkey is currently observing is the strategic gap occurred in Central Asia. Now the US has withdrawn its forces, well, leaving behind a gap. Who will fill it? Yes, Russia is in Ukraine dealing with a war, though. There's another fact. They still have offshoots in Central Asia by means of military posts or collective security treaty organization, or sometimes leader to leader relations, even though there are some fragilities. And China is over there with a great strength, by the way. So in this sense, Turkey is interested in what will happen in Central Asia if the strategic gap is filled with these countries. So should we go with Turkic state organization or deal with another solution? So this is an ongoing process currently. And another and final thing, as Shamsa briefly explained us, it's radical organizations, mainly Daesh, because when there happens a gap in terms of politics or security, they can feel it and spread it to the rest of the globe. And this is another concern of Turkey, I believe. Well, I think we have summarized exactly the basics of some chapters, not the all, by the way. I would like to thank you all. I see a lot of, hearts, smiling faces, emojis for Shamsa. I think her social sphere is just pushing everybody. That's a good thing that we have followers right now. So I would like to thank you. I would like to thank Professor Ramazan Erda. I would like to thank SETA Foundation. And also, I hope we will translate, we have some chapters in English, you provided it, but we will translate the others and publish in English language. So we will present it to the global public's preference. So thank you so much. I don't know if you have any final word, no problem, please, floor is yours. Otherwise, I will end the session.
Thank you so much. You were an excellent moderator and you have done a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.